There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone. The movie from 1983. And welcome back. This is episode 5 of the Unemployed Man Show. We're talking about the Twilight Zone today, the movie, of the show. The show will take a lot more time. Well, maybe in the future it'll be a series of its own, but today we're doing the movie. I had originally planned to do this before Barbenheimer happened and before I saw Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on a whim. But this is kind of important to me, so I definitely wanted to come back to it and didn't want to forget. I'm a huge, long-time fan of the show, and the movie holds a very special place in my heart from my childhood. So yeah, I thought I'd talk about it. So what we have here are 4 individual stories with a nice little wraparound story to connect the beginning to the end. Probably the biggest legacy of this first main segment of the movie, and probably the whole movie itself, was an unfortunate helicopter accident that took the lives of 2 Vietnamese child actors, and that of main actor Vic Morrow, who's the father of Jennifer Jason Leigh, who's an actress that I fucking adore. And unfortunately, the son bitch got decapitated after a helicopter crash. It was very unfortunate. It found everybody involved in court for a decade after that, and many of the rules regarding stunts in Hollywood changed as a direct result of this movie. The second story is so damn schmaltzy and twee that only Steven Spielberg could possibly be behind it, and he definitely is. Part 3, and the most likely candidate for being my favorite segment of the movie, was done by Joe Dante, who made Gremlins and Explorers and Inner Space and Small Soldiers and a bunch of great shit that seems made just for me. And finally, the story that most everybody remembers about this movie features a legendary airplane freakout by John Lithgow that should have won him a fucking Oscar, if you ask me. But with that out of the way, we've got 5 stories to get through and not a small amount of stuff to talk about. So please come take a walk with me into the Twilight Zone. So we begin with 2 men in a car driving down a dark road at night. It's a very, very simple premise. It's less a story than it is a mood establishment device for the rest of the movie. Driving down a desolate road, chit-chatting and screwing around until a very late and sudden final twist that sets up the title sequence of the film with absolute perfection. And it features a jump scare that kind of defined my whole horror-loving ass childhood. We also have a very loving shout out to Burgess Meredith from one of the characters here, who starred in 4 episodes of the original series and serves as the narrator here for this movie in Ron Serling's earthly absence. John Landis' style definitely carries over to his direction of the first main segment of the movie, a time travel cautionary tale about the perils of racism called Time Out. An angry white racist incurs the wrath of a cruelly poetic universe where he finds himself randomly and miraculously transported to various nasty places in time, legendarily known for being highly inhospitable to minorities. First, that old chestnut, that classic Nazi Germany. Here we get a taste of the wild Nazi werewolf dream sequences from American Werewolf in London, which John Landis also directed. Wherever our poor misguided protagonist finds himself, he always appears to the locals as whatever the worst possible thing he could be in that moment is. So guess what he looks like to some 1945 Nazis? Well, anyway, he has to constantly run and hide until he gets blown up with a grenade. And then the unfortunate fellow finds himself looking up at some rather suspicious-looking characters in white sheets with torches and unpleasantly outdated attitudes about black folks. And sadly, he has not found himself on a dock in Montgomery, Alabama, where he might find some backup. Quentin Tarantino could easily have directed this segment, given how freely the N-words and other racial epithets get dropped here. But then our hero, after escaping from these Klansmen, and they shoot at him after he jumps in a river, he has to make his escape, and then he finds himself in what has to be the Mekong River in Vietnam. As a veteran of the Korean conflict, which he mentions earlier in the movie, he is initially overjoyed to see some American servicemen trudging his way, but sadly, either because he forgot or simply didn't realize his full predicament, he is immediately shot at and blown up again. Uh-oh, now we're back in Nazi town. Only this time he has found himself being loaded into some kind of magical train to, oh hell, who even knows? And who are all these huddled masses packed together inside? Oh, well, I guess the dude just woke up and had to catch the subway home. I guess that's all it was. And who even knows what he's desperately screaming to his friends about, who he can magically see leaving the bar they all three met at for drinks earlier that evening. Oh, well, take care, you mean old racist bastard. But now for Chapter 2, a delightful fairy tale set at an idyllic retirement home. This is Spielberg's segment, and as upbeat and harmless as it is, thanks primarily to Scatman Carruthers, given what we just saw and what is yet to come, it sticks out in this movie like a sore dick. There isn't much story here. Spielberg had mentally checked out, as I've been informed in my research. But it kicks off when Scatman Carruthers, possibly the most pure example of the cliched magical Negro character ever, shows up without warning and immediately begins pining for the days of his youth and filling his fellow residents' heads with fantasies of kick the can and dancing without their rusted old spine snapping in half. All are enchanted overnight, save for one crotchety old white guy whose son neglects him in his old age. After inviting everybody out for fun and games at midnight, everyone goes on about their day, thinking it was just a simple bit of fun, until Scatman Carruthers wakes up everybody to find out they're all magically children again. The only real conflict here comes when one of the characters gives their situation some actual thought, and they realize that they'd rather be back in their old bodies, but with a renewed taste for life, a renewed vigor, which is exactly what ends up happening in the end. It's the fluffiest thing Spielberg has ever fucking fluffed, and it's fine, but it's out of place in this movie for sure. But next, we have what is likely my favorite segment, brought to you by Joe Dante. This is such a perfect representation of his mind and his sensibilities as a filmmaker. This segment has Gremlin's signature all over it, along with his movie Explorers. And Tex Avery clearly heavily influenced this piece. And there's a lot of Cuphead in here. If you've ever played that game, you'll see that fingerprints of Cuphead all over this, or you know what I mean, vice versa. This sort of thing influenced the shit out of Cuphead. But a beautiful young school teacher is breezing through town. She stops at a diner, has a small little accident, and knocks a young boy off of his bike with her car. Uh-oh! She apologizes profusely, offers to drive him home and pay for the damage. Whoopity-doo! Here we go. What's going to happen next? We arrive at this particularly idyllic giant house and are greeted by his creepily perfect sitcom-esque family. The family appears to cater to the young boy's every desire, and boy howdy, does it not take long to find out why. Turns out, this boy is some kind of monstrous psychopath with Thanos-level powers of reality manipulation who can make a wish, and it will just happen, no matter what it is. So once the secret is revealed, the family is finally able to start trying to express the depth, the sheer magnitude of the river of shit that the young school teacher has found herself in, just as the world around them explodes into a psychedelic 1930s rainbow giallo nightmare of Bugs Bunny on crack rocks. This is, in my opinion, where Joe Dante has hit his artistic peak. He has long had an affinity for cartoons and animation, and holy shit balls, does it show right here with the nightmare creatures he comes up with for the climax of this segment. Finally, we come to the segment that most people remember about this movie. John Lithgow on a plane, sweating buckets, and screaming about some juicy, sticky creature on the wing of an aircraft tearing apart the engines while he flamboyantly loses his shit inside the cabin, culminating in him stealing a revolver from the air marshal on board, blowing out a window with it, sticking his body out of that window while bellowing and blasting the mystery creature to no effect and accidentally saving the day. Oh, and by the way, the driver of the ambulance waiting on the ground to cart John Lithgow away to the loony bin as Dan Aykroyd again from the opening segment, the wraparound. Who'da thunk it? This movie is hella underrated, With 3 out of the 4 directors giving us some of the very best work of their careers, Steven Spielberg is just there and wanted to contribute so that he could be part of the cool kids club. But it's fine. It's fine. His part is fine. The other 3 are actually actively, though, great. So the prologue is a very brief treat, with both actors being perfectly likable and fun to spend time with. The scene takes place entirely in the front seat of a car, and there's very little to speak of on the directing front outside of some very lovely cinematography, some very rich blues and nighttime colors and whatnot. But with that first main chapter, we get a tense scene in a bar where Vic Morrow gets to do most of the heavy lifting in terms of his acting, with big, angry, racist rants against minorities, punctuated by Steve Williams popping in and asking him to keep that shit to himself as respectfully and gently as anybody possibly could in that scenario. I know I would not have been as nice. I could not be. We also get to see John Larroquette show up as a particularly nasty Klansman, followed by some very minimal character stuff by some grunts in Vietnam when the action briefly shifts there. Part 2, again, is so blatantly Spielberg, I can't imagine anybody else at the time who could have directed it. It's all the cheesiest, heartwarming parts of E.T. cranked up to 11, and I won't say it's not charming, but I will say that all the participants here, it's Spielberg whose inclusion is the most obviously Spielberg section of the movie. Only he could have done it. Part 3, though, is where the real fun begins. The scene unfolds at a very basic, nondescript diner. Kathleen Quinlan, her character traits are established. We also meet the young Anthony, who will soon become something of a problem for our main character. It's only after the 2 of them arrive at the young boy's house that director Joe Dante is permitted to just go hog fucking wild and fulfill his wildest filmmaking desires with insane colors and original cartoons and musical cues and animatronic wizardry from this guy Rob Bottin, who is known for The Howling and The Thing and Legend and RoboCop and Total Recall. It is so great. It is outstanding. I love it. It's my favorite one. And then finally, part 4 is appropriately claustrophobic and tense, as the entirety of it takes place on a 747. I have no great difficulty saying that this is really about John Lithgow's performance, the thrilling music of the storm outside, and the greasy, dreadlocked monster causing havoc on the wing of the plane. This is George Miller's section. George Miller of Mad Max fame. He directed this. It's fucking great. The banter between the 2 characters in the opening is a lot of goofy 80s fun, silly, way outdated traveling games and pop culture references. It's highly reminiscent of the banter between the 2 main male friends in John Landis' classic film, American Werewolf in London, which is to this day a high watermark for the comedy horror genre. Vic Morrow's dialogue in Chapter 1 is highly inflammatory and really, really great. He is imbued it with a grit that I can't think of anybody else who could have provided that same thing at the time, and I love it despite how awful it is, or, ideologically. I have no problem admitting that pretty much every word from Scatman Crothers' mouth in part 2 is delightful. He's so upbeat and positive, and I just love him. And of course, now the obtrusive thoughts force me to think of him getting an axe to the chest in The Shining, and my fucking day is ruined. Also, Anthony, the antagonist of part 3, is played by child actor Jeremy Licht, Licht, and he is absolutely terrifying in parts, yet they still succeed in making his character sympathetic near the end, and I have to give some credit for that. John Lithgow's performance, I keep bringing it up, it's really great. It's easily the anchor of the movie, of the whole thing for me. He's intense and committed and sympathetic, and I really appreciate that they kind of came down definitively one way or another whether or not his character is totally insane. He is not. George Miller did a fantastic job directing this. He is among my favorite directors. You'll see very little of Mad Max in this section of the movie. But yeah, it's great stuff. You should go and see it right now. So about these effects, we don't really get a whole lot of them in the first 3 segments of the movie. They wrap around. There's a monster mask. The first main segment, there's some gunshots and explosions. All well and good. Part 3 does not require special effects, really. But then, part 3 happens, and then the special effects kick in with, like, fucking gangbusters. They really do. The insane lighting and puppetry and original animation that makes up part 3 is a fucking extravaganza, and I can't get enough of it. I love it so much. And then part 4 takes place in the midst of a very intense storm. So the lightning effects, of course, are pretty heavy, but it's definitely the creature effects here that are the highlight. This is a remake of an old episode of the original show, and the upgrade to the featured monster is just goddamn incredible. So strangely enough, the first piece of music that we hear in this movie, the Twilight Zone movie, is Midnight Special by Creedence Clearwater Revival. I've never understood what it's doing here or what its significance is, but if you've ever seen the show, you know that the theme song kicks in at a particularly, well, a couple of points, but one point in particular, it is used just perfectly, and I love that shit. It's so good. It's on my phone. Yeah. So as for the cast, for the wraparound segment of the movie, we have Dan Aykroyd and Albert Brooks. Just two guys in a car. The first official chapter is really kind of a one-man show for Vic Morrow, with some very small parts for various other character actors, including Steve Williams as a highly irate bar patron who gets to tell Vic's racist character, respectfully so, exactly what he can do with his backwards opinions. Chapter 2 is definitely more of an ensemble piece, with almost every resident of the retirement home getting a chance to be charming and memorable, despite the cotton candy of what's going on around them. The star of this one, though, is, of course, Scatman Carruthers, Dick Halloran from The Shining. Part 3 is another group effort in terms of the cast. Kathleen Quinlan is terrific in her part as a strong and understanding voice of authority. We also get a small part for Dick Miller, who is in every Joe Dante movie, God love him, as well as roles for Kevin McCarthy, who is a veteran of the original Twilight Zone series and probably the greatest villain actor the 80s could have possibly asked for. Also, Bart Goddamn Simpson herself, Nancy Cartwright, is in it. With part 4, it is not necessarily a one-man show, because there are some other small juicy parts in it, but John fucking Lithgow, holy shit, does he run circles around everyone else while he absolutely loses his goddamn marbles and just chews up the scenery, and is fantastic. He should have gotten an Academy Award. Take that shit to the bank. So this movie kicks off with one of the best goddamn jump scares in movie history, which I will not spoil for any of you who have not seen it in 40 years since it's been out. This movie's never gotten enough credit, the credit it deserves. It makes me want to finally go and watch Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone revival, which I've been putting off for far too long. I've gotten to where I've really started enjoying doing these videos. I've been able to sit down and commit to something creative, which is very rare for me. And I've done more writing in the last month and a half than I've done in 20 years. It may not seem that way, given the jumbled way that I'm speaking, and all the mixed up subjects. But it's really something. I really am kind of impressed with myself. These aren't very good yet, but they will be. They will be, damn it. So if you like what you've seen and heard here, or at least see some potential for what this video series could become, please like and subscribe. I intend to start up a Patreon page here soon, which I will start hawking shamelessly and frequently in the coming months. So until next week, go get a goddamn job!
There's someone on the way. Something.